back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. On Science Fantastic, we profile the amazing, jaw-dropping scientific discoveries that are revolutionizing our world and touching our lives. Well, right now, I'm actually in Albuquerque, New Mexico, taping here, and we have with us Dr. Seth Shostak, Senior Astronomer at the SETI Institute. That's a search for extraterrestrial intelligence. You know, I'm not that far from Roswell, New Mexico, where some people think that a flying saucer fell back in 1947. Well, who knows for sure? But I'm actually here addressing a science conference, because that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the science of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence with Dr. Seth Shostak of the SETI Institute, one of the leading organizations that is probing the heavens to find out what's out there. Today, we are talking about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence with the man himself, Dr. Seth Shostak. Dr. Seth Shostak, you've probably seen him on TV and a number of great programs. He got his bachelor's degree in physics from Princeton University, his PhD from Caltech. His latest book is called Confessions of an Alien Hunter. And he has his own radio program as well. It's bigpicturescience.org. So you may want to check it out if you want to find out what the latest is about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. So Seth, once again, glad you could be on Science Fantastic.
It's always a pleasure, Michio.
Okay, well, I've asked you this question before, but you were destined to become a professor of physics working on some obscure topic that nobody understands, and here you are, an alien hunter. So what was the turning point? What was the turning point when you suddenly said to yourself, no, I got to be part of this grand search for extraterrestrial intelligence in the universe? What was the turning point?
Well, Michio, you certainly make the first possibility sound pretty attractive, being a physics professor at some unheard of university in some faraway place. That might have been interesting. But in fact, I was doing radio astronomy when I was, at the universities, and studying galaxies, actually, using big radio telescopes. And that is interesting stuff, there's no doubt about it. We've learned a lot about the universe, things like dark matter and so forth, by doing that kind of work. So it was interesting, for sure. But on the other hand, it occurred to me even in graduate school, I have to say, that the instruments I was using to try and learn more about galaxies could also be the instruments that might tell us that there's somebody out there. And that was a very romantic notion. So when I later in life got a phone call from the SETI Institute, and they said, hey, did you want a job over here? I was inclined to say yes, and I did.
Okay, well, when you first started searching for alien civilizations in outer space, we had zero planets outside the solar system that could harbor intelligent life. And now, because of Kepler and the hard work of astronomers, 4,000 extrasolar planets have been discovered, and we can now take a rough census of the Milky Way galaxy, our own backyard. So when you look out in the sky at night, on average, what percent of the stars you see in the galaxy have planets, Earth-size, Jupiter-size? What fraction of the stars you see on a typical night would have planets going around them?
Well, that indeed was the big development of the past 20 years, I guess. One of the biggest developments in astronomy, because you're right. When I was a kid and, would occasionally go to the Hayden Planetarium in Manhattan there, they would tell you, well, we don't know if there are planets out there or not. We think there probably are, but it could be that making planets is a very difficult process, and there really aren't too many, and you should be grateful for the 9 we have. I guess it's 8 now. So, that is a big discovery to find planets around other stars. And the people that do that, there's some of them actually even here at the SETI Institute. I used to ask them on a regular basis as they were finding more and more of these things, well, look, if you had a perfect telescope, what fraction of stars, indeed, do you think would reveal themselves to have planets? And the numbers were 70%, 80%. Well, for an astronomer, 70 or 80% is the same as all Now, there is one caveat. So, I mean, if you say all, then that means when you look up at the sky, essentially all the stars you're looking at have planets. On the other hand, it's also the case that when you look up at night with your eyes, you tend to see the brightest stars. You're not seeing the average stars out there. They're too dim. Stars like the sun. You don't see those. You see very, very big stars that burn out very quickly. So they may have planets, but they're not going to be planets that ET is likely to be on because they don't live long enough for for life to get started and get to the point of developing something intelligent. But in general, 70, 80, 90, 100% of all stars have planets. That means in the Milky Way galaxy we have roughly 1 trillion planets with a T.
That is amazing. Now, years ago, you were quoted as saying that, who knows, maybe in 20, 25 years, we will make contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. So, given the fact that we keep finding more planets every month, has that figure been revised? Do you still think that within roughly 25 or so years, we will make contact with an extraterrestrial civilization?
Well, I have to say, I bet I made that bet, and I promised everybody in the audience. It was just a talk I was giving somewhere, but I promised everyone in the audience I would buy them a cup of coffee if I was wrong, if we didn't find a signal coming from ET within that time. Now, on the one hand, I'm buying a lot of Starbucks stock, but on the third hand, I still stand by that. And it's not so much because we're finding more planets, although that's, important. At this point, we already know that planets are common. The basis of that bet that I made with the public is that the equipment, the technology being used for the search is getting better very quickly. It's essentially following what's called Moore's Law and kind of doubling in speed every couple of years. So that means that this search is getting faster and faster, and it was on that basis that I made this bet. So, yeah, I still stand by that. I may have to buy a lot of coffee, got to tell you.
Okay. Well, everyone knows that when you see a science fiction movie, you want to see the money shot. You want to see the alien. So the movie Contact that Carl Sagan helped to inspire, I thought was a little bit disappointing at the end because you never get to see the alien at the end of the science fiction movie. But now you are saying that perhaps when we do meet aliens from outer space, they may not be biological at all. I guess given the rigors of traveling from star to star. So what are your thoughts now? You've changed your opinion a bit. So you're saying that intelligent life, once they land on the White House lawn to announce their existence, they may not look like any of the science fiction movies that we all love to see. Well, what are your thoughts?
Well, you're certainly right there. It was a little disappointing in Contact to see the aliens and just, see the guy next door, or as it was, Jodie Foster's father, as he was portrayed in the film, when you really want to see the aliens. Now, it's true that the aliens in the movies tend to all look, to begin with, they all kind of look alike, but they also look like us. I mean, they're gray and they don't have any hair and, that kind of thing. But
yeah, funny noses, right, on Star Trek.
Yes, that's right. You just wrinkle their foreheads and suddenly they're aliens. But otherwise, they look like, somebody you might pass on the streets. On the one hand, that may save them money, but today with computer animation, that's not really much of an argument anymore. I think it saves them a backstory in the movie. They don't have to explain what these things are. You instantly know, hey, that's an alien. So, that saves some time in the script. But I think that the point is, if you look at what humans are doing, particularly in this century, and you're the expert on the future of humanity here, we're kind of developing our own successors, right? We're building machines that can not only weld cars together, but machines that can think, that can, write the great American novel. And it's, people at Stanford tell me that we'll have a machine that can write the great American novel by the middle of this century. Well, that's a very short time period between developing science and developing machines that can think better than humans can. And at that point, some of them may leave, go into space because there's a lot more energy and, resources out in the distant parts of the galaxy than here on Earth. So the premise here is that the majority of the intelligence in the universe is not soft and squishy protoplasm, but in fact, deliberately constructed stuff, machines. And so if we pick up a signal coming from space, I think that there's a really good chance that what's behind the microphone is not some little gray guy, but some sort of machine.
Or maybe part biological, part cybernetic. I mean, the rigors of outer space are vast. Radiation, accidents, weightlessness. So why not? Why not genetically modify ourselves and cybernetically modify ourselves? So you think there may be some kind of combination of the two? But, well, what are your thoughts? You've thought about this.
Yeah, well, a little bit. I'm not a biologist. That's one of my many shortcomings. But yeah, we're going to do that. That's for sure. I'm talking to you from the Silicon Valley here, and there are plenty of people within 2 miles of my desk who will tell you that, look, within 20 years you'll be able to surf the web by just thinking the search terms rather than typing them into Google or something like that. That will have chips in your head or wherever. That'll be helping you to never forget stuff and whatever. That's for sure. But in the end, what you're doing there is you're improving this critter, namely a Homo sapiens, who has room for a 3-pound brain. I mean, maybe what you really want is some machine that's the size of an office building that can do a heck of a lot more than whatever you could put in people's bodies. So while I agree with you, I'm sure that we will become more cybernetic ourselves. I think that the real future lies with, sort of throwing away all the protoplasm and concentrating on the machine.
Okay, and let me tell you my point of view. It's something that I've thought about. And, pick it apart and tell me what's wrong or what's right. I think that in the future we're going to digitize the human body, digitize the human mind. We're going to be able to have all our credit card transactions, the internet transactions, Instagram photographs, everything, even the neurons of our brain digitized. And we'll be able to put it on a laser beam, because laser beams can transport vast amounts of information, and you could put your consciousness on a laser beam and shoot it to the moon. In 1 second, your consciousness is on the moon. In 15 minutes, you're on Mars. In an afternoon, you're in the asteroid belt. And so you could zip around the entire solar system at the speed of light. And on the moon, there's a mainframe computer where you can download your consciousness, all the bits and things that are necessary to reconstruct human consciousness, and then put you in an avatar. The avatar, you would then feel and walk on the moon as if you are actually on the moon. And the avatar would probably look like you, except you would be superhuman, super handsome. You'd be able to walk on Mars, go past Jupiter. In an afternoon, you could soar across the entire solar system and come back for dinner at the speed of light. No more flying saucers, no more radiation to worry about, no more accidents involving rockets blowing up. No, you travel throughout the universe at the speed of light, and I call this laser porting. And maybe there's a highway out there that was too primitive to figure out, a highway containing millions of souls that are simply laser porting themselves across the galaxy. So what are your thoughts? Maybe the aliens are so advanced they don't even bother with flying saucers at all. They simply download their consciousness in a laser beam and explore the universe at the speed of light. What are your thoughts?
Well, I certainly agree with you that the best way to travel to the stars is to do it at the speed of light and not have to worry about, carrying all those lunches with you you'll need otherwise. But the problem with this idea, of course, is that you need that machine at the other end that receives the laser beam and then turns it into that avatar. I mean, if it's going to be something with a body and, muscles and all the usual stuff. So that's a difficult problem, and getting that machine out there, of course, is something that's also difficult. But in principle, you're right. I mean, you just want your information, your DNA, for example, the code of your DNA, that would all fit on a CD, if anybody remembers what a CD is, and you could broadcast that on a laser beam in, probably much less than a minute. And it would travel at the speed of light to anywhere you want to go, just as you say. So it could be that that's the way you get around. You don't send You don't send the baryons. You don't send the material. You just send the information. That certainly seems reasonable, except for this problem that you have to have something at the other end. That's a little difficult, and maybe that's the case. But again, it assumes that what you're trying to send are biological organisms. You're trying to send, my brother with everything that's in his brain and, all the information about his body. We're trying to send that into space. But if by that point the real intellects of the cosmos are machines themselves, well, then that's what you're sending. You're sending the contents of those machines. It's sort of like, the hard drive on your computer. Just send that into space and forget about all the information about his liver and, elbow and everything else.
Right. Well, as one person pointed out, one bottleneck in my idea is that the first generation to laserport, they have to go to Mars the old-fashioned way. They have to transport silicon and steel and stuff to build a mainframe computer capable of downloading all that information in a laser beam, and then that mainframe computer controls an avatar, so then you feel everything the mechanical avatar feels. But to go to the stars, well, the first generation to go there has to go the old-fashioned way. You can laser port yourself at the speed of light once the mainframe computer is established. But before it's established, you got to go the old-fashioned way. Okay, well, let me ask you another question. Some people say that radio is so 20th century and that aliens of the future may use more advanced ways, maybe lasers, neutrinos, or pi mesons, or whatever. But what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about maybe we're not using the communication system that the aliens would use? What are your thoughts?
Well, indeed, I think I get emails every day or phone calls from people who say, you guys are looking for radio signals from the aliens? Radio is so old school. Well, I mean, we've had radio for a century. To call it old school, I guess that's right. But on the other hand, the wheel is pretty old.
Seth, we have to take yet another short commercial break. But also, I'll ask you another question. Is it dangerous? Is it dangerous to advertise our existence before we know what the aliens want? Welcome back to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku. I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico right now, not that far from Roswell, New Mexico, where some UFO buffs claim a flying saucer crash landed back in 1947. Well, I'm not here to talk about flying saucers. I'm here to talk about science to other scientists and engineers, but we have on the line with us Dr. Seth Shostak, the Dean of the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. He's a senior astronomer at the SETI Institute in Mountain View. That's a Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. He got his bachelor's in physics from Princeton, PhD in physics from Caltech, and now spends his day, A, trying to raise money for the SETI Institute, but B, looking at outer space. Now, we talked about the fact that radio is what we listen to eavesdrop on conversations between alien civilizations, but some people say, that's so 20th century. Come on. The aliens are way ahead of us, but, well, what else are we going to do? So what are your thoughts about maybe using another way to detect alien civilizations in space?
Well, it's true. As I mentioned before the break, I get emails every week, sometimes every day, from people who think radio is kind of old school. But on the other hand, what you have to do is look at the physics of the situation. How can you send bits of information from one world to another? And radio is obviously one way you could do that. Lasers, which are basically the same as radio, because light and radio waves are the same thing. It's just at different frequencies, if you will. So you could send lasers, and indeed we have some experiments where we look for flashing lasers in the sky. But people suggest things like, as you say, neutrinos, gravitational waves are a real favorite, and other schemes like subspace communication, which is what they use on Star Trek. The trouble is, if I go to the local bookstore, I can't find a textbook on subspace communication. So it's really hard to build the equipment. So
it doesn't exist, right?
Yes, it doesn't exist. So as far as we know, it doesn't really help to say try subspace communication. We can't try it. We don't know anything about it. But things like neutrinos and gravitational waves, we do know something about. And maybe neutrinos, but the problem with a neutrino, for those who care, is that, each neutrino carries a lot of energy. So it's very expensive to make a whole lot of neutrinos, and it's also kind of difficult to detect them. I mean, there's an experiment down in Antarctica, and, I think it's the University of Wisconsin built it, and it's designed to detect neutrinos, but it's a half a mile on a side. This is a big thing. And it doesn't detect very many of the neutrinos that get into it. So neutrinos are hard, maybe not impossible that you can communicate that way. Think of gravitational waves. They're great. You don't have to point your antenna at anything. The gravitational waves will come from all directions. But to make a gravitational wave that's strong enough for us to easily detect it, you need to do things like smash a couple of black holes together or something like that. That's not a very easy transmitter to build either.
Very difficult.
That's kind of hard. So, maybe radio is old school, but honestly, no matter how advanced the aliens may be, I can hardly believe that they wouldn't use things like light and radio waves for some purpose or other. And so I don't think that it's too chauvinistic to keep looking for these things.
Okay, well, our colleague, Dr. Stephen Hawking, who recently passed away, gave us a warning. And that warning is that watch out. We have to study these aliens first. We don't want to advertise our existence because we don't know what their intentions are. Look at what happened to the Aztecs when they met Cortez. They made a huge mistake, one of the biggest mistakes in ancient history. They assumed that Cortez was a god. Big mistake. When actually he was a bloodthirsty plunderer searching for gold. So, well, what are your thoughts about those people who think it's a good idea to advertise our existence to the aliens? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's very controversial. I mean to say, this is an emotional topic, right? People think, oh my God, you're shouting in the jungle, don't have anybody broadcast because who knows what the consequences might be. Well, to begin with, the SETI experiments, which is to say the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, such as our own experiment, using big antennas to try and eavesdrop on signals, we don't broadcast anything. In fact, we don't even have any transmitters, so we can't broadcast. But there are people who indeed want to deliberately broadcast, maybe wake up the aliens. Hey, we're the Earthlings, and we love to meet you and hear what your favorite music is or something, whatever. And just send that into space, and of course that would tell somebody maybe that we're here, and who knows, they launch their interstellar battle wagons toward Earth and, incinerate Los Angeles or something. They always seem to go for Los Angeles. Okay, well, it's hard to say that, well, they would never do that. Advanced aliens are just going to be too refined, too sophisticated. They're all going to be peaceful. I mean, you can say that, but you have no evidence that that's really true, so maybe it's better not to take any chances. Well, here's my thought. It's too late, right? Because we have been broadcasting into space since the Second World War. Mostly, of course, there's television and FM radio. That all goes into space pretty easily. But the big signals coming from the Earth are radar because they're very directed. So they're very intense. And a lot of the sky is covered with radar signals every day. So I think that what you could say is this. Any society out there, no matter whether they're friendly or otherwise, any society that could possibly threaten us by sending something our way, right, they are more advanced than we are. And they don't have to be very much more advanced to have receiving systems that can pick up all this leakage radiation, all these radar sets, or maybe even our television, and they could pick that up anyhow. And so it's too late. I mean, you can worry about this if you want, but we've been broadcasting into space for 70 years, so I do not get exercised when other people want to broadcast deliberate messages. We say, sure, fine, say whatever you want. We've already been telling them we're here.
Okay, so let me ask you then the big question that you've always been asked, and that is, well, why don't they advertise their existence to us? Are they just shy or something? Or are we simply not interesting? I mean, why don't they land on the White House lawn, have a press conference, and usher in an age of Aquarius, giving us the benefit of their advanced technology? We'll cure cancer, we'll live forever, we'll explore the universe, compliments of alien technology. So what are your thoughts about, well, how come they don't visit us? Or maybe they have.
Well, one-third of the public thinks they are visiting. The one-third of the public thinks that some of the lights that people see in the sky are actually alien craft, but they never seem to land on the White House lawn. I mean, I don't know what that says. But the fact that we don't get deliberate, information from them, that they don't try and reveal themselves, as you say, and write something in the night sky that everybody could see, so there's no doubt. I have no idea. I mean, that's alien sociology. You have to ask the aliens. Who knows what their motives are? Maybe they regard us like I regard the ants in my backyard. I mean, I don't go out in the backyard and say, "Hey, ants, here I am." I mean, I just have other things to do in the day.
Well, Seth, I got to ask you this. I'm broadcasting from New Mexico, not too far from Roswell, where some people think a flying saucer crashed back in 1947. However, I am speaking to other scientists and engineers. But, well, the United States military had to admit that, yes, the government does monitor these things. And, yes, they have picked up photographs of strange things up there that seem to buzz our aircraft faster than the speed of known aircraft. So what are your thoughts about these recent developments that the military and the government may know more than they're letting on? Now, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's true. One-third of the public does think that aliens are buzzing our airspace, and an even higher percentage, this is kind of funny, but an even higher percentage think that the government is covering up knowledge of these things. Well, consider that. I mean, I've actually worked for the federal government, and I was never terribly impressed by their ability to keep secrets, but, who knows? But it does require that the aliens, whatever they're doing, they make sure that all the evidence of whatever they're doing is only available to the government, and it can't be picked up by somebody who works at the local science museum in North Carolina or something. But even aside from that, even if you think that the government could keep something as interesting and important as visitation, could keep that quiet for the last 70 years, do you also think that the Bolivians and the Botswanans and the Belgians and the Brazilians and, everybody else is also keeping it quiet? Because if you don't, then you have to assume that the aliens only want to visit the United States. And, it could be because of our fast food. I have no idea. But, look, there's nothing that would be more interesting than to find out that our planet is being visited by beings from another world. And I to begin with, can't understand why anybody would think that would be kept quiet. But even so, I don't think you could keep it quiet, certainly not for 70 years.
Now, back in March, Vladimir Putin of Russia announced that they are perfecting a new kind of weapon, hypersonic drive, traveling not just at supersonic velocities, but hypersonic velocity, many, many, many times the velocity of sound. Some people think that maybe that's the source of all these UFO sightings, because the United States military then had to admit that, yes, they too have been experimenting with hypersonic drives. And just like the stealth bomber created all this wave of UFO sightings around Area 51, it was just a military craft, but the military had to keep it secret. Now the cat is out of the bag. The Chinese, the Russians, and the U.S., all three countries now admit they've been working on hypersonic drive. So what are your thoughts now when you see these photographs of something buzzing our aircraft, seen by radar, seen by multiple people? Is it just test drive of hypersonic weapons, or is it really some alien joyriding themselves in our atmosphere? What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't know everything the military is doing, obviously. So hypersonic drive sounds pretty interesting. I hope it doesn't make a big noise when they fire it up. But it's true that, or it's arguably true that many of the UFO sightings were in fact sightings of military aircraft or other vehicles that the general public just doesn't know about. That could be. But if you're really talking about craft that are alien, that are coming from some other star system, well, if that were really the case, if that was happening on a regular basis, then don't you think that some of the thousands of satellites we have in orbit around the Earth that are, looking down on the Earth, providing the images you see on Google Earth and other places, that they wouldn't have seen some of these? Or the hundreds of thousands of amateur astronomers who, on a clear night will go out and look at the sky, and each one of them is only looking at a tiny part of the sky, but you can, work out the numbers, and it turns out that collectively they're covering a lot of the sky, and they're doing it continually. And don't you think they might have seen something? I mean, it just doesn't seem to pass the smell test, as Carl Sagan would say. Yeah, I think that if it did, you would see exhibits at all the science museums. Hey, here's the evidence for visitation. And, I don't see it myself, but there would be nothing more interesting. It would be job security for me if we could prove that we're being visited.
And also there's that famous TV series, Ancient Aliens, saying that maybe we've been visited in the past, looking at pictures that were carved by ancient civilizations that, well, sort of look like aliens. I've been on the show, you've been on the show, and I'm always careful to say that this is not proof. It could be nothing but artistic license. Somebody drawing a priest with lots of hair, feathers, and it looks like a helmet, looks like an alien from outer space, but really it's ceremonial. But what are your thoughts? Have we been visited in the past?
Well, these things, ancient aliens, it usually considers artifacts that you find in South America, for example, the Nazca lines, which are, big drawings in the sand and so forth. They're not very old. They're maybe 500 years old. You can look at the pyramids in Egypt. They're a little bit older. That's 3,000 years old. But, none of this is very old compared to the history of the Earth. This is all essentially yesterday's stuff. But none of that is terribly convincing because you can think of alternative explanations for all of it. As you say, the Nazca lines, well, they look pretty neat. You see this, big turkey when you look at it from the air. But, why do you think that was made to contact aliens or maybe made by aliens? What about the pyramids? You say, oh, man, they must have had alien help to build those things. Well, no. I mean, these people weren't stupid. And they had lots of cheap manpower. So building the pyramids was a big, civil engineering project, but certainly not anything impossible.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but if you want to find more about SETI Institute, go to the SETI Institute website or bigpicturescience.org, and you can listen to their radio program. Our special guest today was Dr. Seth Shostak, Senior Astronomer at the SETI Institute, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And you've been listening to Science Fantastic with Professor Michio Kaku.